System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
TMK, Emoji Little Tanky Sumler. This is Inner City Left. Today is June 11th. We got a lot to talk about today. Tanky, how are you doing, my friend?
Alive.
All right. I want to start here first. Israeli raid here. 274 people killed to rescue 4 hostages. This was in Nusrat. This is in central Gaza. At least 274 people were killed during the raid on Saturday, according to Palestinian health officials, as Israeli forces rescued 4 captives held in Gaza for more than 8 months. A daylight raid, by the way. What is, to your knowledge, what happened here? And what are your thoughts?
It's a lot, right? So once again, what you have is a psyop that's taking place where the Israelis want to demonstrate that because of their, and we've talked about this before, because of their SIGINT, they're flying so many drones all over the Gaza. Essentially, through facial recognition, they picked up where some of these hostages were. Because according to the story, they're so imprisoned, right? And I don't mean to minimize captivity, but let's do acknowledge that the reason why they were able to be found is because, as the story goes, they were allowed to, like, twice a week go to the market and buy things. So while they're out in the world and the drones are going over, apparently there was a hit. They picked these guys up and then they dropped them off. They dropped off special forces to come and retrieve these guys. Now, let's talk about a couple of these things. One, they were able to retrieve 4 hostages. They already don't like the language coming out of the people that were retrieved. Most of them report that they were not mistreated, to such a point that the Israeli media and the Western media, of course, is trying to utilize language like, "Oh no, these guys have what's the condition where you fall in love with your captor."
Oh, Stockholm.
Stockholm, right, which is not even a real thing, right? Yeah, they've been Stockholmed into loving the enemy, right? Whereas most of these people are talking about the thing that they were the most afraid of all the time is dying from Israeli Air Force bombs, right? You have one of the widows of the hostages straight up saying that she blames the IDF for the loss of her husband because they're heartless. She literally said the heartless IDF. My husband would be alive if it wasn't for the heartless IDF. These are Israelis saying these things, right? So, like, even while you have American officials broadcasting this as some huge, huge success where they rescued 4 people, they killed hundreds of Palestinians. And in fact, 3 Israelis died in this raid. So again, you saved 4, but even from your own people, you killed 3. Now, what this brings up to me is something that's really important, because as a Jewish person, we don't talk about things that are like every Jew knows that not other people outside of our culture understand. What you see happening is Holocaust, right? Not to be confused with Holocaust, but this cultural belief, Holocaust, that Jewish life is literally worth more. So they're willing to sacrifice hundreds of non-Jews for the life of one Jew. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's what you see play out. That's why you don't see shame coming out of the officials that are talking about this, because to them, right, it's a huge success. Because even though we had to kill hundreds of Palestinians, we were able to save four Israelis. Now, I think this is a really important question when we think about how many how many people in the American government that work for perhaps the Department of State, right, are Jewish. Now, I don't believe that having an ethnicity inherently makes you incompatible for a position, but I do need to know your position, because for Jews that are working for the federal government, especially in decision making positions, I need to know what your views on Holocaust are, right? I need to know, does Tony Blinken believe in Holocaust? right? Because then what that does is it lets me know already this is a different kind of Jewish person. This is a dangerous person that is willing to sacrifice an untold number of other human lives to save human lives, as opposed to Jewish lives, as opposed to seeing us all as human lives, right? Where that math starts to then become weird. Like, wait, whoa, you killed hundreds of people and you only say four. How can you subscribe? How can you say this is a success? And that's because under the concept of Holocaust, it's absolutely a success.
Not to mention the inherent white supremacy in Zionism in the West, which sees Palestinians as mainly black and brown people who, they would rather not have there. Joe Biden famously said, if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to invent an Israel. I wanted to mention this too, because this happened also very, right on top of this raid. Um, War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz is resigning now, basically one of Netanyahu's possible biggest opposition. Many people saying the writing is on the wall. What did you make of his resignation?
I think it's mostly ceremonial. I think, again, it also plays in the Holocaust, right? Because he's going to look at the math, right? And for him, even though the hundreds of Palestinians that died are a non-starter, 3 Jews died, right? So like now we've traded 4 Jewish lives for 3 Jewish lives. We traded 3 Jewish lives for 4 Jewish lives. And so to him, it's like, oh my God, what a terrible mistake. We killed you, right? So like, again, what does that mean? Not that much, because the war cabinet is not a real part of it's not like something that exists in a legislative capacity in the Knesset, right? This is literally just like something that Netanyahu put together. So it's not like it forces snap elections in the Knesset or anything like that. His party is still who he had to keep, who who Netanyahu has to keep pleased to keep his majority in the Knesset is is Ben Gavir and Smotrich, right? So long as those guys and that faction of the ultra right, let's say ultra conservative, right, section, but like even they're starting to have their own problems because not a lot of people know ultra orthodox are exempted from service in the IDF, and they're because of the losses that have happened in the Gaza theater and what's happening in the northern theater, which again is still not even talked about that much, because Hezbollah is kicking their ass, right? Um, they're going to have to change the way the society is structured. So now even the ultra orthodox may have to serve. The ones that are out there putting out all that vitriol, wipe out the nation of Amalek, and all of that incredibly incendiary language. Those guys don't even have to serve, and now they may have to. These are the kind of things that
It's what
law,
happens when you're losing a war.
right? If that becomes law, that will be way more damaging to Netanyahu than you know, than Buddy leaving. Because the fact of the matter is he still doesn't have enough coalition power to topple Netanyahu's government, right? But if you start drafting these kids of, Gavir and Smoltrich, now it's like, well, why do we even have you? You can't protect us. That will have an effect on his power.
Two things I just want to bring to your attention. You probably already know this, but I just wanted to get your response. This is something I don't think, was a major story. We posted it on Inner City Left on Instagram. IDF troops hid inside aid truck for deadly U.S.-Israel operation. The savage assault in central Gaza refugee camp involved heavy artillery shelling, tank incursions, heavy drone fire, with the assistance of the U.S. Army. We heard Delta Force. Can you this is a play. The Israelis dressed up as doctors and raided a hospital.
And that happened several months ago. And now this has happened, right? And there's real implications for this. Like the World Food Kitchen has now suspended operations in Gaza.
Yeah.
They're like, you have literally just made it that. And that's it's not it's kind of the benefit, right? It's made to look like, oh, this is a bad byproduct. No, that's what they want to happen. They want people to not trust the food that's coming in the aid, right? Let's remember always the port never had to exist. The United States government could have said quite literally, we're putting flags on American aid and you will let it through. A strong president could have done that. And that would have been the end. I mean, is the IDF gonna are we gonna have a Liberty event where like the you know what I'm saying? The Israelis open fire on American vessels with American flags? Like if that happens, that makes all of this much simpler. Much simpler. Because we're not talking about the 60s where you can hide those kind of things. That video will get out, just like the video of these apparently American special forces got out. And this is a war crime and it's undeniable. But what bothers me at least as much is as an American, I didn't vote for any of this. And now we start to understand why guys like Aaron Bushnell are self immolating because the president's not even acknowledging, in fact, outright denying that there are any American boots on the ground. And no
which
Democrats
is
are pushing
just
back.
a lie. We know that's not true. Um, I love that you brought up the port. I wanted to mention that too, because we see that it's falling into the sea, and B, it's being used for military operations, which they said it was not going to be. Everything that comes out of the mouth of any state official is a pure lie.
Or
Um,
gaslight, but these were outright
yeah,
lies. Again, it's obvious that that's what the intended purpose of it was, because if it was not that, Gaza already has openings. They have border openings. There's no need to create a special opening to get food and commerce into Gaza. Those places exist. So the fact that the military had to create a special military port, right, with military technology, to me, I never assumed it was going to be anything other than used for, at the
of
very
course.
least, some military application.
And most people did. I think, and it's just insulting to our
Right.
intelligence to have us believe that you want to do it to get the
Who's
humanitarian aid in.
who's the Republican? The one that's assumed to be Matt Gates, the presumed pedophile, who's you know he's talking to Lloyd, and he's like, "So you're telling me you're gonna put the port up in an active theater of war? Will those soldiers have bullets in their guns? What happens if they come under fire?" Like he's like, come on, man. Can you please acknowledge to the people that there are Americans that are at the very least in harm's way, right? Can we have a vote on this? And it's so amazing that there's not a single Democrat has these kind of questions. Like, because you should be. The anti-war, quote unquote, anti-war Democratic left should be all over these things. Where's the squad on this, right? They've been remarkably quiet for all of the virtue signaling they did about, oh, it's a genocide. We need to do something about it. You guys did nothing while your president made a $380 million military port that literally got washed away right after this raid happened. Talk about a bad omen.
I mean, okay, so we talked about that. We know that the United States, we know that, I don't want to say, I'm not reporting that Delta Force was there. I'm just saying Larry Johnson reported that, and I'm just reporting what he reported,
And
okay?
there were several people that have commented, including Palestinians on the ground.
Right, right. An American Marine, right? I mean, different,
You
it's
know what
much
an
different.
American flag looks like. You know what an
Yeah.
American uniform looks like, right? I mean, I'm not going to gaslight the people that are being shot to death. I'm just not prepared to do that. Yeah, Larry Johnson said it, and that is important. But Palestinians who are being shot at said it, and that's important. Can I confirm that happened? No. But people that were being shot at said it happened. I'm inclined to believe it. Who would know better than them?
I want to go ahead and move past this just because it's so connected with, is America involved, double dutching back and forth? This is in the LA Times, aiming for real life field NATO's biggest drill since the Cold War, send a signal to Russia. Expansive NATO drills in northern Norway may be just war games meant to hone the fighting skills of the newly expanded 32 nation military alliance. But for the troops taking part, they are very real.
Learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. We right back to it, right? So these are the biggest NATO war games that have happened in years. There were thousands of troops that were utilizing this, sailors and such. There was a coalition of pretty much over 20 NATO nations, naval assets. and they launched B-52s, which is why I'm making my joke, of course, because that's the weapon system that's used in what is that movie?
Dr. Strangelove. Is that
Doctor
it?
Strangelove. Yeah, the B-52 Strato Fortress, right? Pretty much has only one purpose. It's the long-term nuclear bomber of the United States. I mean, this thing goes back to at least the 70s, but probably the 60s. It exists because it only does one thing and it does it better than any other plane can in the world. And that's fly forever in the sky and have incredible redundancy so that even if it comes under fire, it's able to drop off its payload. Its payload is a nuclear payload, right? So they simulate it in the middle of all of this tension and stress, in the middle of all of the warnings that we've heard from Russians like Medvedev and Putin and Sergei Lavrov about how serious this is and what Russia will do if these lines are crossed. In light of the fact that Ukrainians are bombing into the old Russia, this is the time when NATO wants to run a drill that simulates a nuclear attack on an accepted part of Russia that's actually not even that close to the field of war, the theater of war in Ukraine, right? And in exchange, what happens, right? To make good on the things that Putin has been saying, we have uh, um, you have several naval assets from Russia on the way, steaming at full steam to Cuba that have nuclear weapons, up to and including zircons, which is their fastest hypersonic weapon, which can in fact be nuclear tipped. So you're talking about once again, and we've been saying this in Inner City Left for more than 2 years. You're talking about, again, a literal return to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba will not have the nuclear missiles, Russia will. But those Russian weapons and weapon systems will be docked at Cuba, less than 90 miles away from the United States, with missiles that they're not the intercontinental, but they don't have to be when you're talking about a hypersonic missile that can travel thousands of kilometers. So what you're talking about, what's at risk, right? From Cuba, New Orleans, Miami, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Houston, right? All of these places would be well within range of a first strike from one of these weapon systems that will be docked in Cuba. And it's just again, it's the Russians giving the Americans a taste of that feeling. Like, please understand, we are not without we are not without options. Like, we're not powerless. We also can do something that very few other countries in the world can do, and that's harm you. Like, not economically, but harm you, right? Because it's just not something that the United States is used to. I mean, think about the still how much trauma is associated with the United States from 9/11, right? And we're talking about something that happened well over 2 decades ago. Now imagine the consequences, right, of taking this brinksmanship too far, and in exchange for I don't know, one of these missile systems from France or America or Britain striking somewhere in Russia, Russia decides enough is enough and they make their own strike. Whether or not it's even a nuclear strike, even with a conventional weapon, that's just not something Americans are prepared to experience, right? And there it
Yeah.
is.
And it's so funny because President Joe Biden had mentioned, oh, they're sending, missiles into Russia, but it's not like it's Moscow, and I think Russia is also saying, okay, well, we won't hit DC.
DC, right?
We won't hit DC or New York or Los
That's how
Angeles.
ridiculous it sounds.
We'll
Like,
just
what?
hit Little Rock and like Miami and, Charleston, or I don't know. I don't know what their targets are, but I know that there's millions of
Come
people that live
on,
there.
work it
It's
out.
just
You
a
think you can sell
very,
that to the American people? Like, you
yeah, he said it like it was some dunk. We're not hitting Moscow. What are you talking about?
it's just Belgorod. Okay.
Or me, okay. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, again, I think Americans just not, like you said, not really used to having, because even if you talk about 9/11, you're talking about,
It feels different if
now,
you didn't live in New York, right? It's this academic thing. It's this thing that happened. It was a terrible tragedy. People lost their lives. Thousands of 2,996 Americans lost their lives. Right? These numbers are stretched and burned into the American consciousness, but those are
And
rookie numbers
yeah,
compared to what Russia could do, even with a conventional strike. Like,
because they were not they were not a nation state. They were being
right,
funded by a nation state, the
right,
Saudis,
right,
but they were still, not. And 9/11, we could go into all the time, but
right.
I do want to again not acknowledge that this would be from a nation state, and I don't think Americans are ready for that.
And
I don't think the world is ready for that.
it continues to go on, right? And this is why it's important to listen to other world leaders, right? Like, you don't have to like these people, but you do need to hear what they're saying so that you can make your own judgments about, are they serious or are they bluffing? When Putin says America wants to, no, I think it was Lavrov said, we can make conventional symmetric responses to hostility, right? But we also can make asymmetric responses, right? Like, oh, you don't have a problem with giving Ukrainians weapons that they're using against Russia, old Russia. Well, what happens then if the Russians start to give their weapon systems to people that don't like Americans, right? If Russian politicians are going on their talk shows talking about it's the best investment we could ever make, we're killing Americans, right? As
Lindsey Graham.
Graham said, right? So like now you have to worry about like the Americans are already in enough trouble when you look at the fact that at this point we pretty much have to confirm that an aircraft carrier was hit by the Houthis.
The Eisenhower.
The Eisenhower, one of the
Yeah, we forgot to talk about that. That's in North.
vessels in the Navy. I mean, God, what the only thing that could be more embarrassing would be like hitting USS Enterprise, the vessel, not the starship, or like the Ronald Reagan, like the Eisenhower. It's impossible to understate how storied this weapon is, how prized, how treasured it is in the Navy.
Treasured, yeah.
Treasured. This is an American. There's only, listen, I know people think that America has unlimited military resources. America has less than 13 aircraft carriers, and at any given time, only half of them are operational. So, like, for a country like the Houthis to hit, and it's first off, it's not even supposed to be possible. There's no way a nation like the Houthis are supposed to be able to, a movement like the Houthis are supposed to be able to hit one of the flagships of the Navy. Did it sink? No, right? That's a whole nother thing. Was it hit? Almost undeniably, yes. I mean, it really looks more and more like that is a thing.
They released fake images.
Right.
They released not fake images. They released older images.
Right.
Oh, we heard that we heard that the what?
The captain of the Eisenhower released fake images. You're like, oh,
yeah, or old images, yeah. Captain. That's what it was.
Now I'm just saying, imagine what happens now when they have state of the art zircon weapons, because that's what's happening, right? That's what's happening in Ukraine. They're being given state of the art scout missiles, state of the art ATACMs from the United States, state of the art. What's the British, the Storm Shadow? These are happening. The Taurus missile from Germany, like these are happening. They're giving Ukraine an army of Nazis. It must be stated.
I need to jump in. I need to jump in because I just got this from, what is this, the AP? I want to read this to you because you touching on it. I just got to read this. The U.S. has lifted a ban on providing American weapons and training to a controversial Ukrainian military unit. I wonder what makes them controversial.
What makes them controversial?
Yeah, that was a key to the Azov Brigade is among Ukraine's most effective and popular fighting units, but has been dogged by its origins as a volunteer battalion that drew fighters from far-right circles and criticism for some of its tactics. It's so funny to me how the West constantly tries to dance around the fact that the biggest neo-Nazi population in the world is in Ukraine. When my friend Anthony Blinken, went to do his rocking in the keep on rocking in the free world. Okay. They had to take down the paraphernalia. You see how I got paraphernalia on the wall? You got paintings there. This is just our rooms, right? So when you at a bar or whatever, you fill it up with art, because the world needs art and crazy concept. But most of the art that was on the wall, was Nazi paraphernalia. So basically, this bar was Nazi Bennigan's that Anthony Blinken was playing in.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to the ridiculousness of? I mean, can we just acknowledge that that Ukraine is full of neo-Nazis, and so is the Azov Brigade?
I mean, we don't have to. Less than 10 years ago, the FBI actually did a report on it. You can Google these things. Like, it is known. And people act like that is just one small subsection. No, that is the ruling class of the Ukrainian military. Those will be the very last people that die. The very last people that die till the end, right? If you think that we're joking, you should do your own research on who Bandera was, right? Bandera was an out and out Nazi who helped the Ukrainian resistance fight against the Soviets. I'm sorry, in World War II, if you're with the Germans fighting the Russians, you're a Nazi. And Bandera admittedly was. And all of the political establishment in Ukraine owes ties to the Bandera movement. Like, these are not slights. These are not slanders. This is history. This is real. This is confirmed even by the American government.
And this is what happened in the Canadian Parliament, where you stood for a literal Nazi because you were fighting against Russia in World War II. So what does that mean?
Right.
I want to talk to you about this real quickly, if I can. This is my last thing. U.S. wants to create hellscape of drones if China attacks Taiwan. The top military commander says U.S. plans to send swarms of drones. I wonder if they're kamikaze drones, or maybe they're drones that want to live. I don't know. Drones in the Taiwan Strait if China moves to attack Taiwan. The top military commander in the region told Washington Post. What are your thoughts on this? A hellscape of drones. Is that the type of language the United States should be using right now?
Again, it comes from this this ideation that America is beyond military reproach. And nothing, they can do whatever they want to anyone, and no one can do anything back. This comes from the bravado you get from not fighting near peer. We talk about this a lot on the station, near peer nations as far as military power. I want to remind you, China is a nuclear power. A nuclear power, probably the third most powerful nuclear state in the world, behind only the Russians and the Americans. So what would it mean then? What would it mean if a Chinese commander, the chief Chinese military commander in this hemisphere, which they don't even have those things, right? Said, I'm here to make the American maritime waters a hellscape, right? Like, I mean, that's a declaration of war. We talk about, again, on this channel, how you might be the head of the Pentagon and you think about the continuation of the state. But when you're a general in the field, you're still thinking about your career and how glorious would it be, right? How many American generals have gotten drunk off this wine? Douglas MacArthur wanted to nuke China in the Korean War. Again, what gives America the right to legislate what happens in China when, once again, the federal government contractually agrees that Taiwan is under the one China principle and is in fact part of China? You're talking about making a hellscape for China should there become hostilities between China and China. It's a civil war, much like the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. These are people that ethnically are the same. The Kievan Rus go back for 1,000 years. So you're talking about a cultural shift, schism, split that may or may not be happening. And what you absolutely do not need is foreign energy to help this metastasize into something different, something worse.
Yeah, I know you're a big. Sorry, go ahead.
The bottom line is there's not much the Americans can do by way of logistics. Even in the article, he talks about something, we have some classified responses. Really? Do you think that China doesn't have classified military assets, right? I mean, so again, it's like it's this talk as if there's nothing that China can do um, militarily to harm the United States for this type of behavior, which is not even to say that China's response would be military, because China has many ways of addressing such a grievous slight. But more than that, it would also definitely be a military response, which China has openly stated on more than one occasion. This is the first red line that must not be crossed. I want.
I know you're a big battle historian. I don't know if this was the Romans or whatever. Maybe you can clarify it for me. But there is this idea always of, I think, the Western ideology that maybe came from the Romans or whatever it is, to sort of find out what these tribal or ethnic or cultural differences are, align with one side to try to beat the, like, whatever side you are more, comfortable with, you just align with their side. And you just mentioned it, with Ukraine and Russia, the Kiev and Rus. Again, it's an ancient civil,
And they do
or
this everywhere, right? In Iraq, they do it with the what is it? They're part of Iran. They're part of
like
Iraq,
Kurdistan, maybe.
Kurdistan, the Kurds, right? The Kurds have the most favorable relations with the Americans. So they're always doing everything they can to agitate and provoke within the Kurds to help them destabilize, Turkey, which is a NATO member, which is amazing, right? Syria, Iraq, and Iran to create this greater Kurdistan, an idea that really probably can never happen, has never really happened in history. There's never been like this land of the Kurds. They've always kind of ethnically been parts of other nations. Um, and up until not long ago, maybe 50 years ago, they mostly identified as in the region, right? They would see themselves as a Turk. They would see themselves as a Kurdish Turk, a Kurdish Syrian, a Kurdish Iraqi, a Kurdish Iranian. But now it's primarily a Kurd, which is what they've done in Ukraine, as you state, and what they're trying to do in Taipei. The young people, they see themselves as a Taiwanese man, not a Chinese.
Yeah, and I would say that too. Like in places like, Congo and Sudan, and it seems to be always the Americans or the Western world funding one or both sides simply to
Israel,
destabilize a region. Yeah,
Israel's a great example. How there'll come time when when Netanyahu actually does things to, and it sounds counterproductive, but real, does things to enhance Hamas's position. Right? There's times he does things to enhance. I keep wanting to say the PLO, but the Palestinian Authority, right? The spiritual uh
everybody wants the PLO to run the game. Even Trump has said this. I mean, they are the most agreeable to the United
PLO, right?
States.
Because they hated the PLO because they were still
Right.
militant, right? But the Palestinian Authority, which is the the seeds from that, the much more neutered, right? They do the things that they can to hype them up, even though
They're completely defanged, and the Palestinians in the West Bank themselves have
Yeah.
said specifically, watch out.
Right.
Watch out what you say, who you shake hands with, and things like that. I mean, Trump could not say enough good things about Abbas. I mean, that's really to tell you something about what the so-called government of the PA or the Fatah, whatever you want to call them.
Man.
Yeah, and it was a great show. You look great, by the way.
Thank you.
I see the tank. Was this the tanky button there?
Had to do it. Had to do it.
Had to do it. InnerCityLeft.com. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all the stuff, all over the places we find podcasts. I'm going to get it good one day.
Shout out to all the people that missed the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're getting to do it. We're getting to do it ourselves.
Right. We didn't want you to miss it. It's like how
Brought it back.
it's like
Hollywood, man, they gotta always re-release. Cuban.
no, it's a whole remake. It's a new remake. Yeah. Cuban Missile Crisis 2.
Yeah.
I want to give me a second. I want to show love to our Patreon members. If you want to support us financially for as little as $5 a month, you can do so. Whatever. It's plugged enough down there, but I just want to give a shout out to No Ground, Robbie, Paula, Lissa, Suzette and Dennis. Much love to them. Hit us up if you can. If not, like, subscribe, whatever. Comment below. What do you think? What do you feel? I know we're a budding channel. Send it to your friends. Let them pop. Any thoughts and feelings before we're out of here, Tanky?
Hey, man, we got a couple more days to live, man. It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine.
Man, so glad that I can spend this dystopia and apocalypse with you, my friend. We are again sending y'all love out there. Much love, Inner City Left, and peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.